Good evening and good morning, depending on where you are in the world, whether North America or Australia. Welcome to Fluid Vessels, the reading series of the Montreal Prize. This is our ninth session since we established it and the second this year. And I'll just get going with my preliminary remarks as people join us from around the world. My name is Eli McLaren. I'm the director of the Montreal International Poetry Prize. The purpose of the Montreal Prize is to make time for poetry, to open that hidden hour in every day for the creation of poetry and for the reading of it. I can't say how glad I am to be working with a team of really super colleagues and students on this year's prize. The entry period for our 2024 competition is open. The deadline is the 15th of May. And as we solicit new poems from people around the world, we feel it's only fitting to showcase the work of our own jury members and finalists whose work was selected for our last anthology. The first winner of the Montreal Prize in 2011 was the Australian poet Mark Treddinick. And ever since then, we've been enjoying what I like to call the Treddinick effect. And this is not only the huge wave of interest and participation from Australians in the Montreal Prize every year. In the last competition, fully 10% of the entries were from Australia, but also Canada's steadily increasing awareness and awe for the technical and moving and vitreous poetry being written in Australia. And Martin, my assistant on the prize, has organized today's reading in honor of this relation, the Treddinick effect that is developing between La Belle Province du Québec and the big country down under. So we're really excited today to have the pleasure of listening to the work of three super poets from Australia, Damen O'Brien, Jessica Wilkinson, and Jo Gardiner. The host of today's session is Martin Breul, poet and PhD student in the Department of English here at McGill University. Martin is researching book publishing in the late Cold War era, specifically the translation and dissemination of Canadian literature in East Germany in the 1970s. Martin's own chapbook of poetry was published last year by Cactus Press of Montreal.
Thank you so much, Eli, and thanks for nudging towards my own little contribution, which certainly pales in comparison to what everyone is about to hear. But yeah, it's true that we have been thinking for a long time about doing an all-Australian reading, and the idea really came to life last year when my colleague at the prize committee, Jeremy Desjardins, and I sort of last minute, under more difficult circumstances, assembled this series comprised of finalists of the 2022 prize. And we saw all these wonderful poems coming from Australia, and we thought they should get their own reading. But then we immediately knew it's going to be difficult to make that work with the time difference. And then it couldn't happen last year. So I am very happy that the day has come when we can make it work. And so without further ado, I'll introduce our first reader for today. Damen O'Brien is representing Australia on the jury of the Montreal International Poetry Prize 2024. But his story with us truly began when he placed a work in our final round in 2020. And he was one of 4 poets to reach the final round of our 2022 competition with 2 different poems. This success of Damen in our contest is a worthy fact to begin this introduction with, since it is exemplary for an impressive legacy he is carving out for himself, and that is easy to miss if one merely pays attention to the spines on the bookshelves. If, on the other hand, one keeps an eye on major poetry competitions online and around the globe, it seems impossible to miss Damen. Some prizes he took home are the Moth Poetry Prize, the Peter Porter Poetry Prize, the Newcastle Poetry Prize, the New Millennium Writings Awards, and the Magma Judges Prize. But Damen is also racking up countless nominations, long list and shortlist appearances, including globally prestigious competitions such as the National Poetry Competition 2022 and other Canadian prizes such as the Fiddleheads 2021 Ralph Gustafson Poetry Contest and Art Poetry's Poem of the Year Contest in 2023. This kind of success Damen O'Brien demonstrates shows that he deserves to be a juror of the Montreal Poetry Prize 2024 because he clearly knows more than anyone how to write a poem that succeeds in competition. He has been published in the journals of more than 5 countries, including Mean Gin, Arc Poetry Magazine, and New Ohio Review. Recently, his second collection of poetry, Walking the Boundary, has appeared with Pitt Street Poetry. The book, according to its publisher, brushes a variety of themes and topics, both familiar and alien, and it is tracking the boundaries of life, love, death, and the afterlife with a cameo from the Devil's Wife. Thus, his new book picks up where the first, Animals with Human Voices, published in 2021, with Recent Works Press, left off. In his debut, Damen makes his readers see the world with animal eyes, rethink history, contemplate religion. He responds to some cornerstones of the English canon, such as Eliot's The Wasteland and, of course, Alien. The book's opening poem, A Rainbow Made of Soil, sets the stage for the collection's colorful poetic journey perfectly. The poem declares, I am mostly soil, nudging in the red throat of darkness, and the soil moves through me, making its blind promise, its digestive ethics. All my paths are innocent. The metaphor of the worm plowing through the earth aimlessly, leaving it fertile and full of life-giving potential, becomes a vehicle to describe the poetic freedom that enables Damen's work, a freedom that he continuously employs to write poem after poem, finding new resonance with his readers across the globe, including, but thankfully not limited, to the judges and jurors of the many competitions he champions. Damen, welcome. It's a pleasure. The word is yours.
Well, thank you so much. Wow. I'll do my best to make up for that introduction. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Eli, and thank you to the Montreal Poetry Prize. I should say too, I am reading today on Quandamooka country, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I'll start with a poem that was actually in the Montreal Prize, Bookend to a Flood. Sky empty of clouds, and we chew stubble for weeks, until he tells me we are leaving, but there is nowhere. The earth is evaporating into dust and desperation. The drought reveals the land's napped skull, skinned to a grin of granite teeth. The end of the earth begins with dust and dubious gifts. Hulls on their blocks, beached beyond any ocean, piers over dunes far from their tepid shores, the acid retreat of water, the last days of petrification, and things better hidden, rummaged into corners or drowned for forgetting, dented barrels, wrecks and disasters, surreptitious concealments, sunken treasure. The day before we abandoned hope, tossing it like a wriggling bag of kittens, the scouring dried the middle of the dam, and we could see a bleached and bloated suitcase. Nothing given over to the nip of eels and poke of turtles blankly nudging can do a man good, can re-pour the water or populate the ossification of our town dead of thirst. But my husband dragged it to the cracked margins of the dam, grunting about salvage, and stood staring at it with the raw eyes of a fortune teller whose card will not turn. I thought of Pandora cupping shadows and a curse. I thought of the emptiness to be found in a magician's hat. I thought of the bundles buried underneath the silent threshold. He broke the old locks and swore at the contents, stumbling from the bones of a little girl sleeping here in the water of the district's last dam. Now there's truly nothing to hold us. I wonder how long she huddled there drowning while the great drought baked us, and how long in turn will the wind push us to wander until rain falls again to cover all our secrets. In keeping with the theme of apocalypse, I'll read you Apocalypse with Goats. On 4th of August 2018 in Boise, Idaho, over 100 goats break loose from a nearby field. You wake to another creature's trumps of doom, the street full of the ragged bellies and beards of goats, waxy horns of goats, nodding goats as silent as the tomb. You find them steady on the roofs of cars, they kneel or rise, nudging through the neighbour's slatted fence your trellis. They turn to watch you with their calm, inhuman eyes. With their slotted orange eyes, their tombstone teeth, they stand there like dazed congregants exiting a church, confronted by the burning consequences of belief. A quiet tide of more than 100 shaggy ghosts lost from their own fields and materializing in your street. You think of Alfred Hitchcock's Birds, of hungry ghosts. You look for a sign of blood splashed above your door. You look for hooves peeking from your boots, a devil's satyr flanks, but you seem no different than you were before. The men come, mending gates and fences, and with wide arms shift stubborn beast. And so the busy world begins, the day with broken flower pots and muddy cloven charms. This is not your Armageddon, nor your guilt or shame, but as they're herded and chivied away into their trucks, you know there's been a judgment all the same. I'll read you some poems from the new book, out now. Buy it if you can. The Next Sunrise. We were in the air when the world ended on the ground. I woke to the seatbelt light, my neighbour's curious belly pressing me down as he leant over to peer through plexiglass, the sounds of prayers and sobbing. Where the dull expanse of the Malacca Strait pours its commerce into Singapore, container ships like skyscrapers rolled back and forth as though marbles or fingers pushing the wrong way through the nap. Skyscrapers, like container ships, laid down, and everything laid down and washed with water until the quay was grey as dishwater or as clouds, or mugs and soapy spoons. They won't be wheeling down the light refreshments now, perhaps not again, and the seatbelt sign will keep its lonely post. We're done with seatbelts, and it seems with mobile phones. All the cell towers and all the world have fallen and will not rise. But the sun is rising, a brilliant orange blaze as perfect as the sunrise ever was. Over the painters in their waterlogged smocks who could have painted it out. Over drowned poets in their soggy superlatives who could have written of it. I looked for a dove with an olive in its beak, but there was just the receding of the wave, a hard-luck rainbow, the morning sky, and the absence of stewardesses stonkered in the tail on serving bottles of gin and tonic. But this is the most beautiful day of the rest of our lives, and I can tell, as we circle endlessly over Changi used to be, that there is hope for us, that things will work out after all. The Inheritance. When the angels came to take us all, I hid. They raptured all my neighbours one by one, pulled the ripcord of their soul out of their mouths and flung them up to paradise. But not me. I crawled beneath the floorboards with the cats and listened to them walk from room to room. The food spoils and the weeds grow in the street, and the angels come to scour my home less often. I know to avoid the searchlight that is God and do my scavenging for tins during the day. But this world that they have left for me is good. The trees flower like this is the last season for their fruit, and the birds sing without ceasing. I will have my 70, then I will be gone, and they will still be singing, world without end. I don't write many prose poems, but here's one of them. A Tour in the Garden of Earthly Delights, after the painting by Hieronymus Bosch. The man made of eggshells with tree trunks for legs was there, and the man with a bird's head was there, and the man with ravens flying out of his bottom, he was there. There was fire, of course, and it burned terribly, but after the first century, everyone became used to the pain, and the people from heaven were there, always complaining about the management. The self-promoters were there, networking furiously. People who owned more than 90% of humanity's wealth were there. Jesus had got that right. But so were the ones that steal the remote control. Reluctant voters were there checking their watches. People who say it's the principle of the thing, who say it's not personal, it's business, who say let the market decide or trickle down economics. They were there in droves, pushing shopping trolleys. Superman and Captain America were there, raising their flags, but not Batman. Poets were there, counting syllables, stabbing each other with sharpened M-dashes. The balladeers were absent. Close talkers, they were there, the saliva bubbling on their lips. All the American presidents and all the president's men. Trump was in there twice. There were skeletons, of course, but they seemed to be enjoying themselves, method actors really focusing on the next line. Due mainly to an administrative error, petty bureaucrats were there. If there were rapists, murderers, child molesters, I never saw them. There were massage therapists and personal trainers. A whole troupe of musicians entertained us for days, the instruments coming out of awkward nooks and crannies. Timeshare providers, holiday packaging offers, the people who put discount labels on things, who upgrade phones, who buy premium wines. They were there in such profusion I walked on their bodies, the bones cracking like lollies. I was there, and you were there, and the eye that is not the eye, and the eye that hides behind the eye, they were there, clamouring for attention. There was mostly sulphur, but also bleach, smoke, chlorofluorocarbons, mum's apple pie, the man who introduced rabbits to Australia, the woman who invented disposable nappies. Nietzsche was there, a little surprised. Ballroom dancers, people who buy and sell guns are fast-tracked there, provided machine guns and bandoliers, but no bullets. A huge strawberry is there. No one knows why. Fish appear prominently. There is at least one person who is composed of legs, possibly a soccer player. People who don't pay taxes and other people who are jealous of the people who don't pay taxes. Dante passes me on the way out the door. Wizards here, muttering incantations. That red-haired girl from Straight. It's not that bad. It's hell, but it's not that bad. All the industrialists are there, all the denialists, people who give vouchers rather than picking out presents, they're there. The military-industrial complex is there, still finding ways to kill things for money. We've got the capitalist hell, full of levels depending upon what you did in life. Other than the man with a mouth as big as a house and the fish with legs, it's much like here. I passed the guy with a trident. I passed the three-headed dog. I passed the swarm of flies. I passed the comedians who still make racist jokes. I passed the crowd of white women who are scared of black women. If it's hell, it's the hell as it should be. Not excoriatingly bad, not spiteful, not nasty, just a little bit different. Like that holiday you will never take again when it turned out it was the off-season and everything was closed for renovations, and there was also a lot of gastro going around. The blackouts and the searchlights, the boredom and the pointlessness, the Stephen King paperbacks in the reception room of the hotel, the petty, petty doom that takes us all. And to round us out, I'll read you another poem that was in the Montreal Poetry Prize. The man who repairs electric chairs speaks of art. If you must do something, do it well. My father taught me that. He'd send the chisel searching through the wood. The mallet followed, tapping like a bird sorting seed, and coiling for him the scrolls and mugging ogres, arching cats, sinuous snakes and dragons, in banisters and handles and the rails of rich men. Even when he knew the detail would be missed, the message lost, a cunning nick of wood to make an eye, a flourish for a tongue, his initials in the branches of a fruiting tree. I have a different grace. I replace the perished leather, make the buckles bright, polish what can be polished. I have my ticket, so I can check the fuses, rub machine oil in each junction, torque the screws, just so. I am my father's son in that. The state is happy with my service, and when I come home from a hard day's work, I spend what gentleness, what art remains upon my child. We have a joke we tell when the brownouts that come in summer make the light flicker, when they make that burning afterglow, and when our little TV zaps into a point and won't return. Was that one of yours, Daddy? She will say. And I say, not one of mine. All of mine work perfectly every time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Damon. That was fantastic. That certainly lived up to and surpassed what I set up with my measly introduction. And with that, I want to move on to Jessica Wilkinson, our second reader today. Jessica Wilkinson is a member of the Montreal Poetry Prize community for almost a decade. She has first been a finalist in 2015 with her poem Firebird, a piece that skillfully uses words to foster a conversation between the bodily and the musical. The poem meditates on how one embodies the other, and how the fleeting but intense energy of sonic harmony is what renders each body distinct. How exactly we conceive of the body is nothing that this work dictates. We might think of a physical body, but the poem certainly also invites a reading of poetry as body. In the words of the poem itself, each body becomes its own distinct poetry in a logical plastic sequence. The message is intense pleasure, and then it is gone. The continuity and consistency of Jessica's own poetic project almost defies this beautiful call for the momentary that once catapulted her onto the shortlist of the Montreal Poetry Prize. Her 2012 chapbook, Marionette, Notes Towards the Life and Times of Miss Marion Davies, constitutes a creative and profound poetic intervention into the genres of life writing, biography, and archival research. In order to transcend conventional possibilities of these genres caged in prose, Jessica breaks down language, phrases, words, and expands, if not outright reinvents, the possibilities of the page. This project continues into her subsequent full-length collections, starting with a longer work on Marion Davies, followed by Suit for Percy Granger and Music Made Visible, a biography of George Balanchine, all published with Australian poetry institution Vagabond Press. Careful curation, braiding, imagination, reflection, and poetic structuring are some techniques by which Jessica makes visible, readable, legible what it means to pursue a human life in the service of music. Jessica is the founding editor of Rabbit, a journal for nonfiction poetry, which recently released its 38th issue. She also co-edited the anthologies Contemporary Australian Feminist Poetry and Memory Book, Portraits of Older Australians in Poetry and Watercolors. And she is an associate professor in writing and publishing at RMIT University, Melbourne. Jessica's second appearance in the final round of the Montreal International Poetry Prize was in 2022 alongside Damen and Jo Gardiner, with her powerful meditation on the writing of a feminist poem. This piece poeticizes the wandering of a distracted mind that connects with the voices of birds who exemplify multitudes of emotions, occupations, and ways of living. Ultimately, the piece asserts the authority of this poetic wandering as a purposeful mode of perception, exchange, and valuable sensitivity to the world that is just as valid as any form of disruptive discourse, as the poem demands in closing, "Please don't interrupt me." And with that, I will cease to do exactly that and welcome you, Jessica. The word is yours. Take it away.
Wow, thanks, Martin. What generous introductions. I actually have never encountered such generous introductions. So amazing. Thanks so much. And thanks for having me. I also would just like to say that to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from Wadawurrung land in sort of Western Victoria, and also pay respect to elders past and present. And Wadawurrung land also features quite prominently in this first poem that I'll read. And that is the one that was shortlisted in 2022 for the Montreal Poetry Prize and called On the Writing of a Feminist Poem. And I suppose just reading it aloud, not on the page, requires you to just remember the first line that I read out. So if you could all do that. Okay, On the Writing of a Feminist Poem. Just because I am staring out the window at the tallest stringy bark some 30 meters away, yes, about that far, where a kookaburra was just a minute ago, perched on a high branch reaching sideways. That bird I used to loathe, I was too self-conscious, its throaty laughter I would take as an affront. But now I've grown to love because I'm more attentive to her impressive chest. Come close, I want to say, and let me ruffle through that creamy colour with my weird fingers. She's since flown off in that way they do, a bit unbalanced, like a bayonet mounted on a firearm. In her place, a rosella surveys the yard, her eyes much sharper than mine, I'm sure of it. And triangulating insects in the grass. It's so green out there, like a radical carpet. We've had unusual rain this past winter, and I wish I could be like her, with good vision, that I could wake up in the morning and see my own feet, my fingers with their gnawed ends reaching for the alarm, and not the netted blur that makes precision a kind of laboured task. It's 2 months through spring, and still a little cold. I dress in layers, so this cardigan has stretched a few sizes up. I am so daggy and so bored and tired, even though the world out there is magnificent and not at all like my heart. That grey between the trees intensifies the green, like a musical joke, a feat of misdirection. She's gone already, a flash of red across the yard and out of frame. I'm talking about the rosella, but things are pretty shifty. How a magpie wheels around and down to stick its beak into the dirt, pulls at a worm that took all day to get from bush to twig, and now it's dead. There are so many flying things about, attuned to the moments I would grossly pin to a timeline. No wonder the poet's obsession with birds and being envious of plumage and organic coasting on air, even though that envy is bullshit. As if the bird is free and grateful, as if the bird is overwhelmed with soaring majesty, as we are, imagining ourselves out of the animal kingdom and into the green, encroaching on the gravel driveway from lack of visitors these past 2 years. The green recovery, like a little note to say that, despite everything, the world without us will be all right. I'm coasting about, nestless and hungry behind glass, and the grey sky is rolling and heavy, and the kookaburra is back in the stringy bark, and the green breaks once more through my own wheeling distractedness. Doesn't mean that you can interrupt me. Please don't interrupt me. That was in response to a little household tiff about what one is doing when one stares out the window. Okay. So considering the feminist or eco-feminist angle of that poem, I thought I'd follow up with another feminist poem. And this one is a prose poem with a few gaps that you can imagine in the block here when I pause. And I wrote this in the wake of the overturning of Roe versus Wade, declaring the end to the constitutional right to abortion in the US. And the poem ended up being published in the Journal of Psychoanalysis, Culture and Society, which was a new place for my poetry. And like Damen, I kind of rarely write prose poems as well. So, and this is called Choice Lines. The girl was no longer a girl, but a woman for whom years had passed as if a blip, and suddenly there were lines on her big forehead. Before the blip, the girl had imagined that life would be more or less predictable, a long sequence of working days and days of rest, punctuated by meaningful events that had a personal resonance, but were nevertheless as predictable as the days of work and rest. That she would have a family and a house and feel the sense of things occurring regular as breathing or bowel movements. That she would accept the palette of emotions and move through them with a sense of satisfactory accomplishment. That there would likely be no other way. But now the woman looks in the mirror and sees the lines that are there for no other reason than the passing of time. not for the worry of children, nor for the pain of a complicated loss, just the cycle of days of work and rest on her brow. And she thinks of the doctor who glanced at the image, spat out of a machine on glossy photo paper, how he resolutely flipped it face down on the desk as if it was a card from a deck, and that it was to be the work that they would now face together, magician and assistant, the one wielding a knowledge of all the patterns of the universe as revealed through a patient, the other persisting until a solution were exposed as a forced smile. That suddenly there would be a sense of elation, of relief, of wonder at the fact that she never saw it coming, not this way, not quite. The woman had hesitated, her curiosity, wondered if it was a girl, and if so, if she would hesitate again. Wondered if the flip was his move alone or hers. The certainty with which she had said her mind was made up, a test of her resolve. She remembers being a small girl and her father had shown her a trick with a coin that he would pass through a table, and she got down on all fours to find the hole beneath. He repeated the trick, and again she checked the surface of the table, got down on the ground to look up from below. He began to get agitated at her stupidity, that she could not reconcile the conflicting sensory data, nor triumph with the revelation that it was, indeed, not possible to pass the coin through hard wood. She felt that her father's growing impatience showed equal growth in his conviction that she was dim-witted. But while the small girl knew it was a trick and did not know how it was done, she did not really want to know how it was done. To dwell in the grey space of multiple possibilities was a marvellous circumstance. The doctor asked her questions in a matter-of-fact tone and scribbled her responses onto a form that was gapped with spaces left open for her words. And the square of glossy paper remained face down on the corner of the desk, a question with no clear answer. And when the questions were done and the details had filled all the spaces on the form, he at last slid the image beneath the paperclip, and she decided that the moment had passed. In a blip, she is standing in front of the bathroom mirror, and she has too many questions for herself. Leaning into her own image, which she must do to gain a better view, given the length of the vanity, she observes the way her forehead of faint lines twitch under scrutiny. She imagines taking a pen and scrolling answers on those lines, then watching the symbols dance about as she feigns surprise. Only a short time would see those answers fade and disappear, and she might take up a pen again and scroll a new response. Life would indeed be simpler if the answers held firm, or better still, if it were written out for her, an instruction or rule, a prescription to swallow. This thought is fleeting. And as she moves through a series of blips in time, she finds herself thinking again and again of that small moment of charity and wonder. How the doctor flipped the image face down on the desk, how she hesitated, the astonishing singularity of so many worlds opening up between them. Sorry, I just realized that's quite a heavy poem. Okay, on to lighter things. It's quite rare for me to write single poems like the two that I've just read out. So usually, as Martin suggested, I write poems that are part of book-length sequences and which have emerged from extensive biographical research. So I'll just read one or two of those poems, both of which come from the book Music Made Visible, a biography of George Balanchine. And each poem in this book, which is about New York City Ballet founder and choreographer George Balanchine, is titled for a ballet that he choreographed. But I've chosen to read two today from this book, and that continue with this idea of women's strength. So the first poem is called Clarinade, or Notes on a New York Rehearsal, and he choreographed this ballet in 1964 with music composed by Martin Breul for Benny Goodman. And Benny Goodman, who I've just been a fan of since I was a little girl, I was quite a strange child, he performed at the premiere of the ballet, which I found quite exciting. And it's not really in the repertoire anymore, this ballet, but I found in the archive in the New York City Library, Public Library archive, I found really old footage there in Lincoln Center. So clarinade, or notes on a New York rehearsal. Specificity points wildly in the score to gradually louden on dissonance. The set is nothing if not 60s or 70s, or maybe those quavers snake the air presently as girls with ponytails and polka dots drop lemon slices into fizzy drinks, their skirts chafing at the thigh. The couple of the hour drooping deadpan as love at a roadside diner, and the trumpets wah and wah and wah wah in and out. The clarinet melts in the all-out hot, sweeping toast crumbs to the corners. She has her head on his shoulder when the score notes, sweetly, without reliance, on the exit. Party time starts in the dessert hour, ignoring beats without dropping a one. Those frenetic hips prove a jazzy souffle to give you what for, rolling casually into hot coffee and sugar, kick up like vibraphonic bones. The clock leans into midnight, and they know what to stretch, how to flick the switch and stir at any speed, in any style. Benny was a gentleman, always polite. We remember his rules of play, if nothing else. And the girls smile, shrug their shoulders, and edge into the twist. And I'll just wind up with this poem, again from Music Made Visible, called Walpurgisnacht Ballet, which is again connected strangely to poems that you read, Damen. So this was a ballet that premiered with New York City Ballet in 1980, a time when the New York City Ballet had become strong with the union, and the union were making demands on the company for better conditions. So Walpurgisnacht is a celebration on the eve of May Day, when the souls of the dead are released to wander at will. Humour at the helm and pointing to hell. We don't know where we are, coasting at sea in a jellyfish sway, or knee-deep in a field of lavender, breathless, while a storm whips up heady affirmation. Do bearings matter when death is certain? Best enjoy the wayward fate, despite the dancer's strike. They have grown beyond family, cruel success. Mr. B is sullen, remembers the old days, his pawned pants, struggle. Things are different now. Smooth intervention is a hopeless pass in the face of mad silence. Come now, come to cure the fever of your wounded heart. These women are pushed and pushing us to be bold. Hair pulled back, there are ribbons, revellers, pirouette ending with a head tilted right. The night is always neat in the beginning, grace of Monaco allure and hop-to-toe quick spirits in the balance. In no time, the cup is drained and music kicks from bells to drums, overthrowing quiet reverie. The vision becomes wild hair, fierce legs, frenzy, and that stiff right-angled palm signals charge. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. And yeah, heavy poems are allowed, even though it's late in Montreal and weekend in Australia. I think it's wonderful how your work shows what poetry can do by not shying away from serious issues and not shying away from genres like biography. But now I will turn things over to our third reader, Jo Gardiner. Jo Gardiner is a writer who lives in the Blue Mountains in Australia and worked as a psychologist. Most recently, she was shortlisted for the 2024 Gwen Harwood Poetry Prize, gained third place in the 2023 Newcastle Poetry Prize, and was highly commended in the 2023 University of Canberra Vice-Chancellor's International Poetry Prize. This follows the publication of poetry, short fiction, and non-fiction in Meanjin, Westerly Island. Her novel, The Concerto Inn, was published by UWA Publishing in 2006 and tells the story of two sisters who are lured back to the mythical place of their childhood through a plot of love and violence. The novel has been praised as an exquisite detailing of love, longing, loss, and renewal, reminiscent of the writing of Marguerite Duras. Jo's contribution to the 2022 finalists of the Montreal International Poetry Prize, The Cage, is a remarkable piece that became an instant favorite with the prize community at McGill. Together, we have read and reread The Cage and discussed its poignant rendering of the collision between the moving realities of love, kinship, and family across national borders under the duress of a global pandemic, of bureaucracy, of cultural and political divisions. The piece depicts a dying father and his daughter quarantined in a Melbourne hotel and describes their longing for reunion. The poem advocates for the transcendent power of memory, its capability to form connections that outlast constructed boundaries. Poetic imagination becomes an encouraging vehicle for an affection and care that has grown from something deeper than legally facilitated connections which we might form. In the lyrical rebellion against such regimes that keep the poem's two characters separate, the form finally succumbs to the mediation of language, and the daughter, quote, floats through blue and violet silk, glossy as any purple sunbird or kingfisher's plumage. In her voice, he hears the wind flow through summery oriental palaces, and every bitterness falls away.
Thank you very much for the privilege of being here today. It's just wonderful to be in such the company as Damen and Jessica. And I'm speaking to you today from Woodford, as Martin said, in the Blue Mountains, which is Gundungurra country. The first piece that I'd like to read for you today is an extract from a highborn, and it's called Bendemeer, which is a place in the New England Hills in New South Wales in Australia. Bendemeer. Daylight holds the world in place. Evening brings bells and phantoms with lamps. You keep bones in a can, rattling like a box of dried fish. You watch for ghosts, and being watched for, they do not come. But their eyes find you, and you remember faces in shadow, smoke rising from hair. And now night brings in soft wind, a falling down spell, something hollow as a cello. Like a fall of snow, it closes the world down, as on that morning at Bendemeer, when you each woke sensing that something had happened. No birds sang, silence played an ice piano. Ransomed to dark earth, a crocus slips from inside the snow's ice-cold lips. Once outside, you saw that night had filled morning with snow. On the veranda, 3 white-haired boys flickered like lights against dark clouds. Another child stood in a red dressing gown. Your skin itched inside a rough woolen jumper. In your mouth, the metallic taste of something fallen from another galaxy. The pipes froze. By the gate, the pony waited, head hung low, one hoof resting, eyes closed. In great vaults of winter light, you felt the snow's breath and paused in white spaces that erased certainty. You took slow steps through stone flowers, learning the crisp solace of snow that made invisible all the garden's bones. The snow lay so long that day that under your pillow you slipped a book of glass songs. Inside it sang our frozen voices, as if all the world knew it was just the snow that had dreamed us up. The full moon makes clear the impossibility of our presence here. That same evening, the pony's hollow hooves struck the icy road. A mob of black duck lifted from the river where they had flown to roost. With dark coming on and the moon risen full, you turned for home. On the gleaming icy road, the trees were restless. engaged in that game of yes and no with the wind. Night let loose shadows of birds that flew off in quick breaths. You slackened the reins. The pony flicked back silky ears, picked up the pace, stretched out and bolted, the legs flying like fingers across piano keys. Plovers flew up from shadowy tussocks, startled by an angel barrelling home in a sheath of moonlight. At the gate, you came to a sudden stop. Your breath slowed. You and the pony each repossessed your lives. Above you, across the vast night ground, a stampede of stars. Thank you. The next poem I'd like to read is an elegy for my youngest brother, who was one of the white-haired boys in that first piece. It's called Still. In the headlights, a dream dismembered, a fox burned into road, its brush curled into evening. Each night that passes, it's there still. A fox becoming less a fox. Parrots fly their rhythm along the wall. In a cortege, cloud shadows cross the wide pasture. Flayed in dazzling light, cattle pull sweet grass from the earth. I sweep up crumbs and laughter from under robiniers, your plush mop tops, their only weakness, a tendency to heart rot. Roses blown plump with light release their scent. The plumbago, its blue breath. Mudlarks' grussy voices pluck at sky, and in the she-oaks the wind plays slender branches, sings up memories to store like honey in a jar to be exhumed in the coming days, nectar left in tombs to feed the dead. I hold my cup of grief very still, lest it spill into this last fetch of light, where I watch you leave the world that once owned you. I'm here still when the mop tops lose their poise to a wind gust and release their load of leaves. Still here when you walk away into a morning rinsed with gold, your perfect feet now stained with pollen dust. Thank you. The next poem has an epigraph by the writer John Freeman, and it is, "Poetry is the vapor trail of lived experience." I just love that. This poem is called Stanzas. If you talk about tomorrow, they say, the rats in the ceiling will laugh. So speak only of this one day, when morning drops its bright curtain across the window and the yellow walls watch you stir and shake birds and leaves from your hair. Each room entered builds a desire for the next. Now, a blue room where light tumbles through water and slips from your grasp like soap. Now you're a shadow, pausing at the top of the stairs, listening to the clatter of cutlery and catching the smoky scent of the tea you drink in the glass room that lingers over the garden, the poplar trailing seeds and dreadlocks. A king parrot hurtles past like a beating heart thrown headlong into its wild future. Later, at your desk, by the lime green wall, the light dims and the world ends. before the sun appears again and the bowerbird that dimmed the day is long gone. It was here you learned to love the longitude and latitude of these rooms, how you were once elsewhere, now here in your heartland, and with room to be. In the red glow of the lamp at day's end, the house shifts and speaks before it comes to rest, and all its rooms collapse into dusk. This last poem was sparked by Eli making a comment about this beautiful volume. That's the 2022 collection of the Montreal Poetry Prize. And he made a comment that it was very special because it has French flaps, which it does. And I treasure it, and I'm so happy to be in there. This poem has an epigraph from the wonderful Gregory Orr. Let's remake the world with words. And it's called Quotidian. Our bed is like a book with French flaps. You tuck in its fly leaves if the book is slim, or at the beginning of a longer story. Throw the sheet to shake up bees and scents of soap, and the sun billows softly out. Watch its length fall. You catch the ends firmly at the foot to make a mitered corner origami crisp, and slide pillows into cotton slips, and smooth the place the beloved's head will lie, when each night of our lives, folded into a white envelope, we resume in one long breath our correspondence with the night. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful to hear. You have quite a mesmerizing pace and voice. Yeah, I didn't have the pleasure to attend the launch of the anthology, I believe, where you presented this piece, or like presented the cage. So it was great getting the chance to hear you share some poetry here. So we have some time left for questions, for conversation, for comments. My question kind of came to me as I was reading Jessica's work in particular, but I'm also interested in what the other two readers have to say about this, and that is the very almost predictable question of form. How does form arrive to the language, or to the narrative, or to the, I guess, project, to be as general as possible? We had like a couple of mentions of prose poem, including Damen, who said he doesn't write them that often. Our last winner was, of course, a prose poem, whereas The Cage is like very disciplined in these like neat couplets, which get sort of antagonized almost by the punctuation of the poem. But then we also have Jessica's work, which, like, the pieces that were submitted to the prize are kind of what you would expect from contemporary poetry, but the books look like this. They're full of like, language is completely merged with like other ways of signifying, with music, with sound, and I'm just interested like how form arrives to this. And yeah, like, I'm interested in what all our readers have to say to that, but it is a question that grew out of my reading Jessica's book, for sure. So I invite you first.
I can just cut me off if I go on for too long, because it's a topic that could just expand into infinity for me, because it's kind of like the thing that I'm interested most in writing poetry. And also, don't tell anyone, but I actually really, I dislike writing poetry. I find it deeply stressful. But what I love to do is research. I love going into archives, I love doing site-based research, reading lots of books. Going into archives like the New York City Public Library, Lincoln Center, Jerome Robbins Dance Division Archive. I've spent months there, and in Harvard's Balanchine papers, because they bought all his papers after he died. I love just spending time making notes, and I guess like following through all those pathways through documents. And for each of the books that I've written, the form emerges out of the research. So you'll notice that marionette book, it's very visual. It's a lot about kind of deterioration and disintegration, like, literally like on the page. And has also set out like a series of film reels that was kind of influenced by the material I was engaging with every day. And then my book on Percy Grainger, he was a composer, musician. He was also like a rampant self-flagellant. He was really into whips and walking these crazy long walks and lines of correspondence. Anyway, the idea of the line kind of really came to the fore through all that research. And the book, I think, is really dictated by this idea of multiple lines, like physical lines and poetic lines. It's a very kind of, I guess, reductive summary of the book. But and then with the Balanchine work, it is set out like a program of ballets. And so each poem is like a gathering point for what was going on at the point when he choreographed a ballet, and it's got references to the choreography and the music that he used for that ballet, and what was going on in history at that point. And so I think it's very much research led for me. And then how poetry and poetic forms, which I think are quite mutable and flexible, how they can serve the telling, they can serve the character, so that each biography can be a unique form that responds to that person rather than being, the usual kind of framework. Anyway, but yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Damen, Jo, do you have comments on the question of how you decide what form you want to put your poem in as it emerges?
I'm pretty random. I wake up in the morning and say, "Oh, I might do a rhyming poem today," or I might do 3-line stanzas and turn that into a poem. I recently wrote a sestina because I overheard someone say sestinas are really hard to write, so I thought, I can do those. Give those a go. But typically, I write very blocky text poems. The one I read today, the prose poem, I wanted to try and write the longest line I could write without a full stop, and see how far I could go, and it did lend itself naturally to a prose poem kind of vibe. So there you have it.
Yeah, on the topic, sorry to cut you off, Jo. I have one more remark on the prose poem. An anecdote, given that our most recent winner was a prose poem, because our judge, Lorna Goodison, she said she doesn't like prose poems, but this one it has to be the winner. So it kind of forced itself on her, even though she didn't want it to be, because it was because she doesn't like the form. So it's funny that prose poems come up today. Sorry, Jo.
No, that's right. That is interesting, isn't it? I find that for me, the poems are very much products of the body, and so I might listen to other wonderful poets like Jessica and Damen, and there's a rhythm that I get into, and then I'll go for a walk or I'll swim, and there's something about the rhythm. So for me, it's very much decided around that. Also, I guess I play around a lot with form, so I can feel an innate discomfort with the shape of something. And I think I learned a lot from Mark Tredinnick in that respect. He's a wonderful teacher, of course, and he talks a lot about form. But it's really interesting the way the rhythm of the body guides me. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Do we have other questions? Do we have questions from the audience, comments, responses?
Yeah, thank you guys so much. That was incredible. I just have kind of a question for everyone. And it was a question I had a long time ago when I was reading The Cage by Jo Gardiner, but I feel like it so applies to everyone who read here today. I feel like in all of your poetry, there's such a specific naming of like Australian flora and fauna. And it feels so important and central to your work's kind of soul, but it also kind of goes past that. It's not just a simple local regionalism. And I was just wondering, how do you try to incorporate these small details while also trying to speak about something greater than just your surroundings?
It's lovely to see you again, Jackson. I met you at the last Montreal reading, the launch of the anthology, and I valued your comments very, very highly. For me, it's essential, I guess, growing up in the countryside in various different locations. I spent a lot of time immersed in the natural world. And for me, as I've grown older, it's grown more and more important in my life. And the birds, the plants, they accompany us through life in such a vivid way that they are essential, and they say so much. A lot of people are talking about the other than human life at the moment, and it's an idea that I was very familiar with when I was young. So there's almost no way that I can write a poem without a bird in it, as Mark would say, put a bird in it. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with what Jo's saying. And they say you can't know a thing without naming it. And I believe that, and I think that's even more important in poetry. You can't have a good poem without texture, and the texture comes from the specific, from the pointing at the real thing, not at just the idea of the thing. So I actually admire people, and Mark's one of those, who really understands the names of nature. I wish I did. The lorikeet, you can probably hear the lorikeets out there, but that's about as close as I get to knowing the names of birds.
I'm not sure if I can add too much, except to just show you the frame where I saw. So that's my outside. Could you see that? Yeah. This is the frame out of which I looked to write that poem, the first poem that I read. But I grew up in the country as well. So I and lived in Melbourne for 15, 20 years and went slightly insane. So moved back into the middle of nowhere, even though I work in the city and have to travel like 2 hours just to get there. So I think definitely, just like Jo, there's a kind of wanting to be part of the land, but it's also the specificity of the things that surround us that, while transmuted to poetic line, I think makes a stronger poetic line in some way. But yeah, I've often kind of wondered about that the birds and flora and fauna feature a lot in Australian poets' work, and how that translates to international audiences, but maybe hoping that there's a curiosity there to find out about more about what goes on all the way over here as well. Yeah.
So we're coming up to our time, and maybe Martin will forgive me if I intercede now to kind of wrap things up and thank everyone. I often find myself sort of thinking in day-to-day conversation that I want to get past the surface. I want to get to the sort of deeper speaking, as Mark Tredinnick says, the deeper speaking that lyric is. It just we sort of tap into a register where we can sort of speak truth with a greater solemnity and depth. And I feel like that's sort of what happened this evening or today, depending on where you are in the world. Damen, there's a wonderful irony in some of your poems. You really make fun of the poets. I really value that. There's a kind of levity there. And at the same time, there's something very solemn and true, and that holds definitely, Jessica, for what you shared with us. And Jo, I remain a huge fan. We want your next book. I want to be able to quote this line about the stampede of stars in the night sky. Maybe I'll have to go for a walk, in fact, after this session is over. Thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts here in Canada. We're so happy to have these friends in Australia. So thanks for a wonderful session, and yeah, best wishes.
Yeah, thanks everyone for sharing your work. This was wonderful. If anyone's interested, there's links to the books of all our readers in the chat real quick. So your last chance to quickly click if you're interested. Yeah, recommend all of it that I've read. Good for reading, and as Eli has tested, good for sponging the rivers. And the copy of Jo Gardiner's novel slipped into the waters. Sorry for exposing that to the public, Eli.
Yeah, that's okay. It's all right. It's kind of fatter than it used to be. So it looks like it's more pages than it once was. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Good night. Good afternoon. Bye.